Before Sophia Caldwell became the town's golden girl, before she ruled the tennis courts and had everyone hanging on to her every word, our paths had already crossed, though neither of us had realized it at the time. The first time I saw her wasn't in high school, nor was it on a tennis court. It was long before that, on a stifling August afternoon at the annual summer festival. We were just kids, no more than 10 years old. I had just lost a tug-of-war competition and was sulking near the lemonade stand when she flashed past me, her blonde ponytail whipping behind her as she laughed, chasing after her brothers. Even then, she was quick, her movements fluid, her confidence effortless. That summer, my father brought me along on my first visit to Caldwell Manufacturing, the company where he had worked as a machinist for as long as I could remember. I never fully understood what he did, only that he always came home smelling of oil and metal. As I wandered through the massive factory, awed by the towering machines, I spotted a girl around my age standing near the front office, arms crossed, voice sharp as she argued with the receptionist. Even without knowing her, it was clear this was someone who was used to getting exactly what she wanted. Years passed before I saw her again, this time in middle school. By then, she had transformed into the girl everyone either wanted to be or be with. Meanwhile, I remained an invisible face in the crowd, too quiet, too lanky to be noticed. While Sophia was already training for her next big tournament, I spent my days sketching machine designs in the margins of my notebooks. High school widened the gap between us even further. We attended the same school, but I doubted she ever realized I existed. She matured early, standing tall and athletic, radiating an effortless charm that made her the center of attention everywhere she went. Meanwhile, I was slow to grow, remaining short, wiry, and utterly unremarkable. While Sophia embraced her striking appearance, flaunting the latest fashion trends that other girls scrambled to copy, I faded into the background, drowning in oversized t-shirts and baggy jeans. She had been dominating the tennis courts since she was 10, her height and strength making her nearly unstoppable. Gym class, for me, was a daily humiliation. I was always the last one picked. But I had one saving grace: running. In cross-country, there was no team dynamic, no picking sides. It was just me, the pavement, and the distance, and I thrived in that solitude. Socially, we couldn't have been more different. Sophia's life was a constant whirlwind of dates with athletes and rich guys. Mine was non-existent. While she pulled into the school parking lot in a different car each fall, I rode the same bike all 4 years. The only time we ever interacted was in class, thanks to our last names, Caldwell and Hayes, often placing us next to each other. And for years, she spoke to me exactly once, handing me a graded test with a curt, "Here." Her family owned Caldwell Manufacturing, the very company that provided my father's paycheck. Over 160 employees worked for them, including him. At graduation, fate, or alphabetical order, placed her beside me once again. She wore a dangerously revealing dress, clearly reveling in the attention, and when she caught me struggling to keep my composure, she smirked, amused by my discomfort. After high school, I pursued a degree in process engineering, while Sophia secured a full-ride tennis scholarship. I saw her name in the sports section regularly, while I focused on reinventing myself. College changed me. I shot up 5 inches, packed on 50 pounds of muscle, and found my confidence along the way. By junior year, I had proven myself, not just in academics but socially too. One winter break, I ended up at a party. Sophia was there, still stunning but completely wasted. Her boyfriend of the week made a crude joke at her expense, and she responded by slapping him across the face before storming off. The rest of the partygoers were too drunk to care, leaving me as the only sober option when she demanded a ride home. The next morning, she woke up in my bed, panic flashing in her eyes. "What the hell? What are you doing in my bed?" I cut her off before she could spiral. "Relax. You were hammered. I stopped you from getting into some random taxi, cleaned you up after you puked in my car, and made sure you didn't pass out in your own vomit. Most importantly, I didn't touch you." She stared at me, the tension in her shoulders slowly easing. Damn. I must have really overdone it. She hesitated, then frowned. "Do I know you?" I chuckled. "Yeah. Dan Hayes. We sat next to each other all through high school. I was the geek drowning in oversized shirts." Recognition flickered across her face. "No way. I remember now. You always got better grades than me." She smirked. "I copied off your tests." I smirked back. "I know. I let you. It was the only way I could talk to you." For the first time ever, we laughed together. She let out a tired sigh, rubbing her temples. "Well, Now that I know you're not some psycho, I could really use some coffee and toast. Coming right up. As I headed toward the kitchen, I caught her watching me in the mirror, a small, intrigued smile playing on her lips. When I returned with coffee and toast, an apron tied loosely around my waist, she chuckled. That is way too much jelly. Grinning, I quipped, you won't need a napkin. I never let great jelly go to waste. Still smirking, I turned back to grab another cup of coffee. When I came back, she was covered in grape jelly, a mischievous glint in her eyes. Oh no, she said, feigning innocence. Looks like I made a mess. Chuckling, I leaned in, kissed her, and slowly licked the jelly from her skin. I wasn't like other guys, the ones who only cared about their own pleasure. Maybe it was my years as a long-distance runner, the patience, the endurance, the discipline, but I always believed that taking my time led to the best results. After a long shower together, we curled up beneath the sheets. As I traced lazy patterns along her arm, I asked, So, why are you staying with Rachel instead of your parents? She hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. It's complicated. My family, especially my brothers, we don't get along. I sensed she didn't want to talk about it, so I smoothly changed the subject. What's on your schedule today? She relaxed, her expression softening. Sophia stretched, arching an eyebrow as she sipped her coffee. I've got some last-minute Christmas errands to run, then a tennis match at 2. I smirked. A match? In a foot of snow? She shot me a knowing look. Indoor courts at the country club. Perks of membership, she added with a wink. Meanwhile, my own day had taken an unexpected turn. A month ago, I had locked in a job interview, scheduled for 1 p.m. today, with none other than Gregory Caldwell, president of Caldwell Manufacturing, and, as fate would have it, Sophia's father. The irony wasn't lost on me. The last time I had worn a suit was at high school graduation, so I had invested in a new one for the occasion. No matter how my morning had started, I needed this job. Taking a steadying breath, I stepped into Caldwell Manufacturing and was immediately greeted by my cousin Natalie, who worked as the receptionist. She grinned knowingly before disappearing into the back office to inform Mr. Caldwell that his 1 p.m. appointment had arrived. Moments later, she returned, her expression amused. He's ready for you. I stepped inside his office, taking in the heavy wood paneling, the shelves lined with books, and the framed portraits of Mr. Caldwell and his father. He rose from his desk, extending a firm handshake before gesturing for me to sit. Dan, he said, getting straight to the point. What brings you here today? Sitting up, I met his gaze. I'm a freshman at State University, looking for a summer internship. Caldwell Manufacturing was my first choice. He arched an eyebrow. Why here? Plenty of companies would be eager to hire someone with your credentials. This town is home, I replied sincerely. My family's been here for generations. My father's worked for your company since he left the army. I remember touring the factory as a kid, completely mesmerized by the machines. That passion never faded. I believe I can bring real value to your company. I pressed forward. Most graduates with my GPA aim for the big cities, Chicago, Dallas, Houston, but that's not me. I want to stay here and work for you. I know I have to prove myself, and I'm willing to start at the bottom. My goal is to earn a summer internship and, if I perform well, secure a full-time position after graduation. Mr. Caldwell leaned back in his chair, studying me intently. You graduated from the local high school, right? He paused, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. Did you know my daughter, Sophia? Oh, hell. Careful now. Keeping my expression neutral, I swallowed and replied, Yes, sir. We had classes together, but we didn't exactly run in the same circles. He nodded. I don't recall you being among the long line of boys who came through my house. Damn right I wasn't. Switching gears, he leaned forward. If I were to offer you an internship, what would you bring to the table? I took a deep breath and laid it out. I'd start with the basics, cleaning, sweeping, taking out the trash, whatever needed to be done. But I also conducted a case study on Caldwell Manufacturing for my industrial efficiency class. That caught his interest. He sat up slightly. Go on. I explained. Right now, your factory shuts down at 4 p.m. for cleaning and restocking. You're paying top-wage employees, guys making $12 an hour, to do tasks that could be handled by lower-wage workers earning $5 an hour. My proposal? Keep production running until 5 p.m., keeping those higher-paid employees productive for an extra hour. Then, bring in interns and lower-wage staff for cleanup. As long as their hours stay under 40 per week, you'll cut costs while maintaining productivity. His eyebrows lifted. You actually ran numbers on this? Yes, sir, I confirmed. I have a full report. He smirked. Haven't copyrighted it yet, have you? I grinned. Not yet. He chuckled, shaking his head. All right, Dan. Let's talk numbers. How much will all this brain power cost me this summer? I kept my answer simple. Start me at minimum wage. If I prove my worth, I'll earn raises based on performance. He nodded approvingly. I like that mindset. Fresh ideas like yours could be exactly what we need. Consider yourself hired as our first summer intern. Do you want me to send over a contract? I stood and extended my hand. No need, sir. Your handshake is good enough for me. With a firm grip, the deal was sealed. As I exited Mr. Caldwell's office, I caught Natalie's amused glance at the front desk. She didn't need to say anything. The triumph on my face said it all. Stepping outside, I exhaled, feeling something rare. Everything in my life had fallen into place for once. Confidence surged through me. I felt unstoppable. Still riding that high, I made a snap decision and headed straight to the country club to catch Sophia's tennis practice. The moment I walked in, I was met with the rhythmic crack of rackets meeting balls, the sharp echoes of volleys exchanged at lightning speed. From my quiet spot, I watched her in her element. Fast, powerful, relentless. No shot went unanswered. No movement wasted. For the first time, I felt an unexpected sense of pride. Somehow, in the strangest of ways, I was now part of her world. The thought still felt surreal. Sophia wiped the sweat from her face with a towel, taking a sip from her water bottle. Then, her gaze locked onto me. Even in my suit, she recognized me instantly. A slow, knowing smile spread across her lips before she waved me over. The second I stepped onto the court, she greeted me with a kiss. I love that you actually came to watch me play. Grinning, I teased, you're burning a ton of energy out here. How about I take you to dinner so you can refuel? She laughed, eyes sparkling. Sounds like a plan. Pick me up at 6:30. I'll be there. That evening, over pizza and beer at Leone's, time slipped away. All it took was a single question, and Sophia opened up like she'd been waiting for someone to really listen. Tennis wasn't just a game to her, it was her future. She dreamed of going pro, competing at the highest level, and one day, coaching. Unlike the guys she had dated before, who only cared about one thing, she admitted that it actually meant something, that I was interested in her life beyond the bedroom. But then the conversation shifted to her family. And just like that, her mood darkened. Sophia exhaled sharply, swirling her drink as if trying to decide how much to say. My brothers work for my dad, she muttered, her tone flat. One's a sleazy salesman who thinks fast talk can cover up incompetence, and the other's an accountant so spineless he practically folds in half when you look at him wrong. Her words dripped with disdain, but when she mentioned her father, her tone shifted. There was respect, sure, but also distance, like she was talking about a man she admired from afar rather than someone truly present in her life. He's always working, she admitted. I don't think he even likes coming home. Then, her expression darkened. My mother, though? A humorless laugh escaped her lips. She's unbearable. Makes life hell for everyone. Suffocating. Controlling. Vindictive. You name it. That's probably why my dad throws himself into work, so he doesn't have to deal with her. I could tell this wasn't a topic she wanted to dwell on, so I smoothly changed the subject. And just like that, her smirk returned. So, what's with the suit? She asked, eyes flicking over me with amusement. Did no one tell you? Tennis is a casual sport. I chuckled, loosening my tie. Believe it or not, I actually know a thing or two about tennis. I've played before, just not at your level. I leaned back. The suit? Had an interview today. Summer internship. If things go well, it could lead to a full-time position after graduation. Her curiosity piqued. She leaned in. How'd it go? Really well, I said, feeling a fresh wave of confidence. I got the job. I start in June. And then came the one question I knew was coming but had hoped to avoid. What company? I hesitated. No sugarcoating it. Caldwell Manufacturing. Her entire expression shifted in an instant. Wait, what? Her voice was sharp, her posture rigid. You had a meeting with my father? Before I could answer, she was already connecting dots that weren't even there. Unbelievable. She scoffed, pushing her chair back. So, what was this? Some long game to get close to him? You used me, didn't you? Oh, for the love of. I reached across the table and caught her hand before she could leave, firm, steady, but not forceful. Sit. Her eyes widened slightly, startled at my directness. My voice remained even. Sophia, I scheduled that interview weeks ago, long before you even remembered I existed. We reconnected days ago, and we ended up in bed after we'd already made plans. You knew I was studying industrial engineering. What other company in this town would I even apply to? This is a coincidence. That's it. She stared at me, assessing. But she didn't leave. Slowly, she eased back into her chair, exhaling like she was resetting for a new match. After a long silence, she finally said, I hear you, but let's be honest, this is way too convenient. You just happened to show up the day before meeting my father? The same day we start dating? It looks bad. I sighed, rubbing the back of my neck. Look, your name came up, but only in passing. Her eyes narrowed. And he asked if we were in the same class. I said yes, but that we didn't really cross paths. She waited, sensing there was more. I hesitated before adding, he also mentioned he didn't remember me being one of the, let's say, many guys who cycled through your house. Sophia's lips pressed together. I could almost see the gears turning in her head. Finally, she exhaled, tension easing just a fraction. Okay, she said, tilting her head. I actually appreciate that you told me up front. If I'd heard this from my dad first, I probably would have assumed the worst. I nodded. That's why I wanted you to hear it from me. She studied me for another moment before letting out a quiet laugh. You know, this is going to get messy. I shrugged. Maybe. But I know one thing. I like being with you. You're one of the most interesting people I've ever met, and I want to see where this goes. Whether or not I work for your dad doesn't change that. If he has a problem with me, he can fire me on my first day. But I don't want this nonsense to get in the way of us. For the first time since the conversation started, she smiled. You're stubborn, she mused. I like that. She leaned in, lowering her voice with a mischievous smirk. Speaking of things I like, let's go back to my place. But nothing lasts forever. Once the holiday break ended, we both returned to school. Saying goodbye was harder than I expected. There was something in her eyes, a flicker of emotion she wasn't used to showing. For weeks, we talked every day. Then, daily calls turned into occasional emails. On Valentine's Day, we exchanged handwritten letters, filled with words that were half affection, half promise. Then, by June 1st, I officially began my internship at Caldwell Manufacturing. From day one, I hit the ground running, absorbing everything I could about factory operations, fabrication, and product design. The workers respected my enthusiasm, and my efforts didn't go unnoticed. Having my father as a department supervisor certainly helped. One of my biggest wins came when Mr. Caldwell approved my proposal to shift cleaning duties to lower-wage staff, cutting costs without impacting production. Seeing my ideas implemented so quickly was surreal. Then, one afternoon in mid-June, while pushing a broom across the factory floor, a voice dripped with playful mockery behind me. A janitor? My boyfriend is a janitor? How humiliating. I turned to find Sophia standing there, looking effortlessly stunning in a flowing summer dress, her smirk unmistakable. I moved toward her for a hug, but she held up a hand, laughing. Oh no, I don't hug dirty janitors. Leaning against the broom handle, I grinned. Fair enough. But what if this janitor is also an ambitious in turn? Would that earn me a hug? She tapped her chin dramatically. Maybe. But only if he takes me to dinner. I laughed. Deal. Time and place. 6 o'clock. My parents' house. Her gaze flickered with amusement. I'm not even sure you know how to get to the nice side of town. But if you're not there by 6:05, I won't wait. With a teasing smirk, she spun on her heel and walked away, the hem of her dress swaying just enough to earn a few chuckles from my coworkers. But I wasn't joking. I had a dinner date, and I wasn't about to be late. By 5:45 p.m., I pulled up outside the Caldwell estate. Through the peephole, Sophia saw me arrive, but didn't immediately open the door. All right. If she wanted to play games, I'd play along. At exactly 5:55 p.m., I walked up to the grand entrance and rang the doorbell. The door swung open to reveal an elegantly dressed black woman, her demeanor warm but professional. She assessed me with quiet amusement. May I help you? I straightened. Yes, ma'am. Daniel Hayes, here to see Miss Sophia Caldwell. A knowing smile flickered across her lips. Of course, Mr. Hayes. Miss Sophia has been expecting you. Please, have a seat. I sank into a plush chair, surrounded by marble floors and quiet opulence. Right at 6 p.m., Sophia made her entrance. Descending the staircase with effortless grace, she let a slow, playful smile spread across her lips. I'm impressed, she mused. Half expected you to chicken out. Janitors don't usually walk through the front doors of the chairman's estate. I smirked. You're right. But summer interns absolutely do. She laughed, taking my hand. Come on, I want you to meet my parents. I followed her into a lavish sitting room. Her father sat flipping through a newspaper, while her mother, perched stiffly on the couch, stared at the television. The tension was suffocating. Sophia's tone was smooth, but there was an unmistakable edge beneath it. Father, mother, meet my companion for the evening, Mr. Daniel Hayes. I nodded at her father. Good evening, sir. Mr. Caldwell looked up and, after a pause, offered a small smile. Good to see you, Dan. Then, I turned to her mother. A pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Caldwell. A sharp scoff broke the silence. Her mother's lips curled in distaste. This is your guest? She sneered. A janitor? The word dripped with disapproval. Sophia, I expected better. Sophia didn't miss a beat. Don't worry, Mom. Daniel has very high standards, so high, in fact, that you probably shouldn't expect me home tonight. I nearly choked. Was she trying to start a war? Or was this some kind of test? Before I could react, she tugged my hand. Come on, Daniel. We've wasted enough time here. Still reeling, I turned back toward her parents. Nice meeting you, Mrs. Caldwell. Good evening, sir. Mr. Caldwell chuckled. See you at 7:30 a.m., Dan? Yes, sir. Outside, as soon as the car doors shut, Sophia burst into laughter. I, however, was still trying to piece together what had just happened. What the hell was that? I asked, staring at her. She smirked, completely unbothered. A lesson for my mother. She needed to understand why we're together. She turned toward me, eyes glinting. And you handled yourself perfectly. If I had scripted your response, I wouldn't have changed a word. I exhaled. Sophia, I love spending time with you, but I'm serious about my job. Your father's company matters to me, just like tennis matters to you. I need you to respect that. Her expression softened, but her voice was still playful. I'm used to getting my way, Dan. But I'll try to be more mindful of how my actions affect you. Her smirk returned. Speaking of which, you haven't reached out in weeks. What's been going on? She leaned in, voice teasing. They say absence makes the heart grow fonder. Was that the answer you were looking for? I shook my head. I just know I missed you. For a moment, something real flickered in her expression. I'm glad, Dan, she said. That means a lot. At the steakhouse, I raised my glass. A toast, I said. To your return, and to the fact that this town is instantly better with you in it. We clinked glasses, the flickering candlelight catching in our eyes. So, how long have you been back? I asked. And why wait until now to see me? She shrugged. This trip wasn't planned. My dad needed me to sign some corporate paperwork. I raised an eyebrow. Corporate paperwork? She smirked. Dan, I'm on the Caldwell Manufacturing Board. I leaned back. You're on the board? Her grin widened. Dan, when you try to impress me tonight, remember, I'm technically your boss. She winked. I'd hate to give you a bad performance review. Feigning shock, I placed a hand over my heart. Oh, really? I had no idea. She rolled her eyes. Oh, come on. I know you did your research before starting at Caldwell Manufacturing. I clinked my glass against hers. Guilty as charged. She was right. I had already looked into it. Sophia and her brothers collectively owned 30% of Caldwell Manufacturing, while senior employees held another 10%. What she might not have realized, though, was that her father still retained full control over voting rights. By midnight, we had called it a night. By the next afternoon, she was already on her way to Wisconsin, where she'd spend the summer bouncing between tennis camps, coaching, training, and competing. We kept in touch, emails, calls, occasional letters, but as the weeks stretched, our connection thinned. By Christmas, we were barely speaking. She had become completely immersed in her world. I had become fully entrenched in mine. That summer at Caldwell Manufacturing turned out to be the best education I could have asked for. Better than any classroom. I learned everything from precision parts manufacturing to working on aerospace contracts for Boeing, Spirit Aerosystems, and Cessna. But not everyone welcomed me. Ethan Caldwell, Sophia's eldest brother, and the company's so-called head of marketing, despised me. And when he found out I had been dating his sister, it only got worse. Ethan never called Sophia by name. It was always boss, sister, or, when he was feeling particularly petty, which in heels. Nearly a decade older, he loved provoking her. Despite his title, Ethan was a fossil in modern business. His marketing strategy? Straight out of the 1960s, booze, strip clubs, high-pressure deals. Reality check? Most clients ignored him, working directly with shop managers instead. But that didn't stop him from draining company funds on extravagant parties and client entertainment. His father tolerated it, probably because Ethan wouldn't last a week outside the family business. Then there was Michael, the middle brother. A different kind of disaster. As purchasing manager, his role was critical. Too bad he was either overwhelmed or just didn't care. Production delays were common, sometimes because he forgot to order materials, other times because he bought the wrong ones. Between Ethan's reckless spending and Michael's incompetence, it was a miracle the company was still running. And somehow, I was right in the middle of it. Michael Caldwell was an expert at doing nothing. When he did show up to work, he spent most of his time sipping coffee and daydreaming about fishing trips he'd never take. His older brother, Ethan, constantly defended him, claiming Sophia bullied him. The truth? Michael had no drive, avoided interaction, and seemed content floating through life unmarried and uninspired. Meanwhile, I saw inefficiencies everywhere, things that could be fixed if anyone actually cared. One idea stuck. A quick-release mechanism to help farmers detach tractor equipment more easily. Excited, I ran it by my father. "I'm thinking of pitching it to Gregory," I said. He shut it down immediately. "Don't bother. Gregory will pass it to Ethan, who'll laugh and toss it. If Gregory asks later, Ethan will dump it on Michael, and Michael won't do a damn thing. Good ideas don't go anywhere in this place." I had already seen enough to know he was right. Countless workers had pitched smart, cost-saving innovations, only to be ignored. Frustrated, I asked, "What if I patent it myself?" My father sighed. "You can try. Just don't expect support." Since patent law was part of my industrial engineering coursework, I decided to take matters into my own hands. The first step? Establish my own business. Just like that, Hayes Marketing LLC was born. Every spare moment outside of work was spent refining my prototype. I needed a patent attorney, so I reached out to Ryan, a local lawyer I'd played golf with a few times. We weren't close, but he had connections. Ryan introduced me to his former law school roommate, a patent specialist. By summer's end, I had filed 4 separate patent applications. Meanwhile, Sophia and I barely spoke. Tennis consumed her. Engineering consumed me. The only time we saw each other was one night at Christmas, a rare moment when her family wasn't vacationing in Naples, Florida. That night was different. Passion. Laughter. The comfort of familiarity. We talked about the future, where we might fit in each other's lives. No conclusions were reached, but the question lingered. In the middle of final exams, Ryan called me with an unexpected proposal. "I've been discussing your patents with a friend in intellectual property," he said. "He's interested in your quick-release mechanism. Would you accept a check for $250,000? I nearly dropped my phone. "Are you serious?" Ryan chuckled. "Yes. And he recommends negotiating a royalty, $1 per unit sold for the next 10 years. My heart pounded. Even better. Then, his tone turned serious. "Listen, Dan. Keep this quiet. You did all your work at Caldwell Manufacturing, and if Ethan finds out, he'll try to claim a cut. Deposit the money into Hayes Marketing. Keep it separate from your personal finances." Then, he dropped one more bombshell. "You planning to stay with your parents after graduation?" "For now," I admitted. "But not for long." He mentioned a foreclosed house the bank was desperate to offload, structurally solid, but in need of work. It made sense. Just like that, I became a homeowner. At Caldwell Manufacturing, my title became chief engineer. The salary wasn't the highest, but I saw long-term potential. This was my opportunity to create something meaningful. Between 45-hour work weeks and renovating my house every evening and weekend, my life was packed. No parties. No golf. No dating. I tried to stay in touch with Sophia, but her pro tennis career had taken off. She was always traveling. Our conversations became fewer and further apart. Then, one evening, without warning, she walked straight into my house. I was painting the living room when she appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes scanning the chaotic mess, paint cans, dust-covered furniture, clothes tossed everywhere. Her nose wrinkled in disapproval. "What kind of disaster zone is this?" she demanded. I smirked. "I'd call it a love nest." She rolled her eyes. "More like an abandoned barn. You've been at this for months. Why isn't it done yet?" "I work full-time, Sophia. The board isn't exactly giving me special treatment." She waved a hand dismissively. "Just hire someone." Then, as if that settled it, she added, I came expecting some romance, but I'm not about to do it in the middle of a construction site. Get us a room at the Hyatt. Of course, I didn't argue. And naturally, my cooperation was well rewarded. That summer, Sophia kept up her habit of dropping by unannounced between tournaments. She'd breeze into town, we'd spend time together, then she'd disappear for weeks. One day, she brought over a suitcase of laundry. As she emptied it onto the floor, a pack of rubbers tumbled out. I stared at them, then at her. She grinned and shrugged. A girl can't be too careful. I wanted to be angry, but we weren't married, engaged, or even living together. I had no right to jealousy. So, I swallowed my pride. I made it to a few of her tournaments when I could, but something felt off. One afternoon, as we sat together before a match, a group of guys approached her. She dismissed them quickly. They left with vague apologies like, "Oh right, forgot. Sorry about that. It didn't sit right." Had I not been there, the conversation would have gone very differently. Meanwhile, my career was thriving. I implemented efficiency improvements at Caldwell Manufacturing, making the plant more productive and profitable. The deeper I got into operations, the more ideas I had for patents. By the end of my first year, I had saved a substantial amount. My arrangement with Caldwell Manufacturing was simple. I brought innovation. They let me operate independently, and as long as I kept generating results, they didn't ask too many questions. But I knew one thing for sure. This company wasn't built to reward the right people, and sooner or later, that would catch up to them. Whenever I developed a new product, I covered the costs myself, materials, wages, everything. In return, Caldwell Manufacturing had the first option to manufacture and sell it. Ironically, I was bringing in more revenue than their so-called marketing director, who spent more time arranging golf outings than actually securing deals. Sophia came back when my house was finally livable, but something was off. She wasn't her usual self. The sharp confidence that defined her had been replaced with something restless, uneasy. It didn't take long to find out why. She'd gotten injured while traveling. With her father's insurance no longer covering her, she was stuck. Taking time off meant no prize money, and returning to her parents' house wasn't exactly appealing. The idea came to me suddenly. "Why don't you marry me?" She blinked. "What? You'd have health insurance, a quiet place to recover, and you'd be with someone who actually loves you." I half expected her to laugh it off, maybe call me crazy. Instead, she cupped my face, her voice softer than I'd ever heard. "That's really sweet. Thoughtful. You know what? I think I'll take you up on that offer." Not the response I expected, but how could I complain? I had a beautiful, passionate woman by my side, someone who made life interesting. What could possibly go wrong? Planning the wedding, for starters. Sophia and her mother had always clashed, but this was next level. Her mother wanted a grand event, something to dazzle her elite friends. Sophia wanted small and simple, a gathering of close friends and teammates. At one disastrous planning meeting, their argument got so heated that no one even acknowledged my mother. She wasn't asked for input, wasn't given a moment to speak. She eventually walked out, unnoticed and unmissed. Sophia and I exchanged a glance. No words needed. Vegas. Eloping was the best decision we ever made. For a while, everything worked. I focused on my career, she traveled the world competing, and whenever she came home, we had exactly what we needed from each other. She wasn't earning much, but her Caldwell Manufacturing dividends kept her comfortable. One evening, I joked, "Since I'm the one increasing those dividends, maybe you should share a little with me." She smirked. "You're lucky I haven't demoted you back to janitor duty." A few weeks later, the phone rang. She was crying. Panicked. "Do you want me to come?" I asked. "Yes," she whispered. That night, I was on a plane. When I arrived, she was sprawled on a couch, an ice pack strapped to her leg. Torn or sprained ligament. It wasn't clear yet. The next step was bringing her home so she could recover properly. At the doctor's office, she went through the routine pre-MRI checklist. "Could you be pregnant?" the nurse asked. Sophia laughed. "No way. I'm on birth control." The nurse smiled, but handed her a test anyway. Standard procedure. Sophia rolled her eyes, took the test, and disappeared into the bathroom. Minutes later, she walked out ashen-faced. "This is wrong," she whispered. "I can't be pregnant. I take my pills, and I always use—" She stopped herself, clamping her mouth shut. My stomach nodded. "Use what?" The nurse noticed her distress and handed her a second test. Michaela result. Sophia sank into a chair, hands shaking. "This can't be happening." I tried to keep my voice steady. It'll be okay. You were going to be off your feet anyway. This just gives you more time to recover. She didn't look convinced. In the months that followed, she took a coaching job at a girls' school. Even injured, she was a phenomenal teacher. Her students adored her, and one of her teams even won a state championship. She also used the school's rehab facilities, slowly regaining her strength. But if Sophia hated anything more than being injured, it was being pregnant. She resented every second of it. She loathed the discomfort, the weight gain, the loss of control over her body. When her chest started to grow, I casually asked if she planned to breastfeed. She scoffed. Not a chance in hell. The delivery was brutal. She needed extra medical attention, and when it was over, the nurse smiled. Congratulations, you have 2 healthy baby boys. Still exhausted, Sophia barely reacted. The next thing out of her mouth wasn't a word of joy. It was a request to have her tubes tied. She wanted the procedure immediately. I hesitated. You sure? I mean, I could get a vasectomy instead, less invasive. She shook her head. No, I want my tubes tied. Something about her insistence unsettled me. If I had a vasectomy, she could still get pregnant. Just not by me. Maybe that was exactly why she wanted to handle it herself. When we brought Cameron and Cody home, my mother and grandmother were already there, waiting to help. Sophia had zero maternal instincts. She handed the boys off without hesitation. My grandmother, in her 70s, took over as if they were her own. To Sophia, this was perfect, a full-time nanny without the expense. Her focus? Tennis. She was back on the court within a year, fully recovered. And once she could move again, family life wasn't a priority. She had money, free time, and no real responsibilities, so she filled her days with matches, tournaments, training camps, and symposiums. She wasn't interested in staying home, raising kids, or even spending time together when she wasn't traveling. I already had my suspicions about her loyalty, so I made a decision. I hired a private investigator. I had her car outfitted with GPS. Her phone hacked for text and emails. Expensive? Yes, but not nearly as expensive as divorce. At home, things only got worse. The walls are the wrong color. There's not enough closet space. Why is my family heirloom in storage? Nothing in our house met her standards. I started coming home early to help. I folded laundry, vacuumed, took care of the kids. But no matter what I did, it wasn't good enough. She found something to nitpick every day. Her attitude toward me, toward everything connected to me, became pure contempt. The only joy I had left was spending time with my sons. Once my mother left for the night, they were all I had. Sophia despised living in what she considered a middle-class slum, acting as if the people around her were beneath her. Meanwhile, I worked long hours while she burned through her Caldwell manufacturing dividends like they were free samples at a grocery store. Since another check always arrived in a few months, she never bothered to save. She pushed for a private country club membership, separate from her parents. She went there every day for lunch, leaving the boys with whoever was available. Her spending habits, combined with her detachment from the family, irritated me more than I let on. By this point, I had already taken a DNA test to confirm Cameron and Cody were mine. I didn't doubt them, but I also wasn't going to be blindsided. The fire that had once defined our relationship was long gone. The longer things went on, the clearer it became that there were more reasons to leave than to stay. But walking away wasn't simple. She could use my love for my sons against me. Worse, she co-owned my employer. One phone call from her could destroy my career. Caldwell Manufacturing was highly respected. A bad reference from them would follow me anywhere. Ironically, the way out came from an unexpected source, real estate. Sophia had grown tired of our pathetic neighborhood and insisted we buy a multi-million-dollar mansion in the country club annex. The price tag would wipe out her dividends, but that didn't matter to her. She wanted it. I suspected part of her motivation was pure competition. The house was bigger and more expensive than her mother's, and winning, even in meaningless ways, was always important to her. While securing high-end CNC machines for my company, Hayes Machine, I also negotiated leasing agreements with Caldwell Manufacturing. After Gregory Caldwell's passing, I was effectively running the plant. Ethan held the title of president, but in reality, he dumped all responsibilities on me, except for dividend payouts. When my role was officially upgraded to operations manager, I asked Ethan for a formal job description. He barely looked up. "Just write it yourself," he muttered. That was exactly what I needed. With Ryan's help, I drafted a description that gave me extensive operational control, including the authority to approve equipment acquisitions, a key factor in keeping Caldwell competitive. My spending limit without board approval? $500,000. Hayes Machine purchased new equipment and leased it to Caldwell Manufacturing. The necessary planned upgrades lowered net income, which in turn reduced dividend payouts. Hayes Machine thrived, but I still needed loans to finance new equipment. At the bank, I asked, "If Sophia buys this house, will it affect my loan eligibility?" The banker didn't hesitate. "If you're financially tied to that property, you won't qualify." Sophia, on the other hand, couldn't get a mortgage without my income. We were stuck until Ryan proposed a solution, a postnuptial agreement. It worked like a divorce settlement. I forfeited any claim to her assets, including her Caldwell Manufacturing stock, and my name wouldn't be on the mansion's deed or mortgage. Instead, I agreed to pay her rent, half the mortgage, plus taxes and insurance. Sophia and her lawyer thought they were outsmarting me, ensuring that if I ever left, I'd walk away with nothing but my insignificant LLC. They didn't realize they were blindly walking into a financial trap. Caldwell Manufacturing stock was declining, meaning her dividends were shrinking. She was putting herself in a precarious position, and her lawyer, who either desperately wanted her or was sleeping with her, let her make reckless decisions without a second thought. But then again, Sophia always thought she was the smartest person in the room. With our financial separation finalized, I turned my focus to something far more important: Ethan Caldwell's shares. Ethan was drowning in debt, drinking, gambling, living beyond his means. His wife, Vanessa, called me one evening, frustration clear in her voice. "Dan, I don't know what to do anymore. Ethan won't stop." I sighed. "I can try talking to him, but you know how he is." When I confronted him, he sneered. "Maybe you should focus on keeping your own wife in line before telling me how to handle mine." I raised my hands. "Fair enough. Just know, if you ever need help, I'm here." I had no intention of helping him. I was waiting for him to implode. That moment arrived a month later, when he was arrested for a DUI, with illegal substances in his car. Desperate, he called me. "Dan, I need $1 million. Fast." His situation was worse than I thought. Along with legal trouble, he owed massive gambling debts to dangerous people. If he went to prison without paying, he might not make it out. I pretended to hesitate. "I can loan you $1 million, but I need your $6 million in company stock as collateral." Ethan hesitated. "Can I buy them back later?" "Of course," I said smoothly. "For $1 million. Within a year. No interest. But that deal is non-transferable. You can't sell them to anyone else." Too desperate to negotiate, Ethan agreed. Deal. After covering his debts and legal fees, he had just enough left to move to Las Vegas, where he insisted he would become a professional gambler. That told me everything I needed to know. He'd never be in a position to buy his shares back. To finance the deal, I used my Caldwell Manufacturing stock and Hayes Machine shares as collateral. Ryan handled the legal paperwork and congratulated me. I now controlled 40% of Caldwell Manufacturing, including employee-held shares. I only needed 11% more for a controlling majority. Meanwhile, Michael Caldwell was barely present. Some days, he didn't show up at all. Other days, he sat in his office, staring blankly out the window. One afternoon, I stepped inside and asked, "You okay, Michael?" He let out a heavy sigh, rubbing his temples. For the first time, I saw it. The cracks. The once untouchable Caldwell empire was falling apart from the inside, and I was waiting to claim what was left. Michael exhaled, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of the world was pressing down on him. "I can't do this anymore," he admitted, voice strained. "It's too much. My doctor has me on the highest dose of antidepressants, and it's not even touching the stress. Dan, I have to get out before this job kills me." I leaned against the desk, watching him closely. "So what do you actually want to do?" For the first time in years, something shifted in his eyes. A tiny flicker of something other than exhaustion. "Disappear," he murmured. "Go to my cabin in the woods. Hunt. Fish. No people. No pressure. Just peace." An idea clicked into place instantly. "What if I make that happen for you?" I asked. "Would you be willing to transfer your shares to me?" He shook his head immediately. "I've tried selling before, but no one wants 30% of Caldwell Manufacturing. Not with Ethan and Sophia in the mix. They'd make life miserable for any minority shareholder. And if I sell outright, I'd have to be smart about investments. Make sure the money lasts." I shifted slightly forward, lowering my voice. "What if you didn't sell outright? Instead, I pay you a fixed amount every month for the rest of your life. And in return, you sign over your shares." Michael sat up straighter. You'd really do that? Absolutely. He hesitated, calculating. How much? I met his gaze. What do you need to live comfortably? He considered for a long moment. 10 grand a month would be more than enough. Done, I said, not even blinking. I'll handle the paperwork. You can pack up your office whenever you're ready. The relief on his face was immediate. Dan, you have no idea how much this means to me. Later, when I told Ryan the details, he nearly jumped out of his seat. Dan, he grinned. Michael would have to live 50 more years for this deal to match the value of his shares. And let's be real, he won't last 10. I smirked. Exactly. But he gets his quiet life, and I get the control I need. Ryan shook my hand, still grinning. For the next decade at least, you have total power over Caldwell Manufacturing. Congratulations. Thanks, I replied. Now it's time to handle Sophia. The house I had spent years renovating had never been enough for her. I refused to sell it, so I kept it as a rental. The last tenants had moved out months ago, and I hadn't even bothered to find new ones. Turned out, that was a blessing in disguise. By September 1st, Sophia was in New York for the US Open, supposedly watching matches, but more likely distracting herself with someone new. Meanwhile, I packed up the few personal items I was allowed to take and moved back into my old house with the boys. By nightfall, we were settled in. They never asked about their mother. Her absence barely registered anymore. She had been an inconsistent figure in their lives for so long that they stopped expecting her. And when she was around, her cold detachment made them uneasy. I tried calling her. Multiple times. She ignored the calls. Sent curt, dismissive texts. Never bothered to call back. So, once I was completely out of the mansion, I left a note. I won't be paying September's rent. The boys and I have moved out. The next morning, I walked into the office. Natalie, ever efficient, was just finishing up a 14-day notice for a shareholders meeting. The agenda? Shareholder transfers, management restructuring, and third-quarter financials. She glanced up, raising an eyebrow. There's a lot happening that I wasn't briefed on. Want to fill me in before people start asking questions? I smiled. Natalie, I now own every single one of Ethan and Michael's shares. That gives me 70% control over Caldwell Manufacturing. A slow, mischievous smile spread across her face. God, I've hated that woman since high school. Sophia stormed back into town a few days later. It didn't take long for her to find my note. Within minutes, my phone was ringing. She was furious. You owe me rent, Dan, she screeched. How the hell am I supposed to make the mortgage payment without it? Not my problem. Her tone turned ice cold. If you don't bring me that check, I'll just raise my dividends to cover the difference. I'll have it taken straight from your salary. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into. It was obvious she hadn't spoken to her brothers. Hadn't even bothered to check her mail. She had no idea what was coming. By the time the shareholders' meeting took place, she was nowhere to be found. The only attendees? Me, representing 60% of the shares. My father, managing the 10% for employees. Ryan, now the company's corporate attorney. Natalie, the board secretary. The first motion? Approving the official transfer of Ethan and Michael's shares to me. The second? Formally appointing me as president and chairman of the board. The third? Canceling shareholder dividends due to declining profits and reinvestment in operations. All motions passed unanimously. Not long after, Sophia burst into my office, her lawyer trailing behind her. She slammed the door open, eyes blazing. Get out of my father's chair, you son of a witch. You're fired. Her lawyer looked visibly uncomfortable, probably realizing she had just embarrassed herself. She hadn't read the meeting minutes yet. Hadn't fully processed what had happened. Where are my brothers? She spat. You don't have power of attorney over them. I leaned back, smirking. I don't need power of attorney. I bought their shares. That means I own their voting rights. Her face drained of color. She snatched the legal documents from Natalie's hands, scanning them frantically. Her lawyer did the same, flipping through the pages before scoffing. This is a joke. You won't get away with this. We'll bury you in court. We both knew he was bluffing. Natalie handed Sophia the official meeting minutes. I leaned forward, voice calm and measured. Look closely at the share transfers, Sophia. I'm president and chairman now. Then, I gestured toward the wall behind her. Take a look at the portraits. For the first time, she turned around. She stared at the long row of framed photos, each one showcasing Caldwell Manufacturing leadership through the years. At the very end, Where her father's portrait had once hung, there was a new addition. Mine. Her breath hitched. I sat back, watching as reality finally hit her. The company her family had built? It was no longer hers. She had lost everything, and I was the one who took it. Sophia's eyes flickered toward the framed portraits, her breath hitching as the reality settled in. 3 generations of Caldwell manufacturing leadership. Her grandfather, her father, and now me. For the first time, I saw genuine fear in her expression. Without dividends, she couldn't afford the mansion, the luxury cars, or the country club fees. She had never saved a dime, never invested wisely. Her entire lifestyle had been built on quarterly checks that no longer existed. She masked her panic almost instantly, her voice smooth and calculated. Dan, let's talk about this over dinner, she said, stepping closer. I'll have your favorite steak delivered from the country club. Come over at 6:30, and we can work through the details. She tilted her head slightly, I searching mine. I don't think either of us really wants a divorce, she added. We should think about what's best for the boys. I almost laughed. She had never factored them into any of her decisions before. But now that she had nothing left, suddenly she was playing the concerned mother? I played along. I'm looking forward to the conversation. At 6:29, I rang the doorbell. Sophia opened it wearing a silk dress that clung to her figure, her makeup flawless, her hairstyle to perfection. Daniel, 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 she purred. You didn't need to ring the doorbell. This is your home. I stepped inside, glancing around. I was just making sure I wasn't interrupting anything. She smirked. Not at all. Wine. I nodded. That'd be great. She poured a glass and wasted no time. I have to say, Dan, I'm impressed. She swirled the wine in her glass, watching me closely. I always knew you were ambitious, but this? You fast-tracked it by 20 years. She leaned against the counter, feigning admiration. How did you get my idiot brothers to sell? That was brilliant. And now it's just you and me. We own this company together. She smiled coyly. We should celebrate this win. I even have champagne chilling for a toast after dinner. I took a slow sip of wine and leaned in slightly. Sophia, do you know how I managed all of this? Her smile wavered just slightly. I worked for it, I said. While you were out having your affairs, I was here building something real. The charm in her expression cracked. To be absolutely clear, I continued, my voice even, I moved out because I'm filing for divorce this week. The room fell silent. I let that sink in before delivering the final blow. This isn't a partnership. I control the majority stake, and what I say goes. You can keep your shares and stay on the board, but there won't be dividends for at least a year. Her mask shattered. You can't do that, Dan, she snapped, her voice rising. That's my only income. How the hell am I supposed to live? I scoffed. Maybe you should have thought about that before. She dropped the act completely, her voice sharp and desperate. Dan, I might have had a little fun with a few guys, but I was always loyal to you. Ask anyone in town. I laughed, shaking my head. Sophia, for the past year, I had a private investigator tracking you at every tournament. I have photos, videos, timestamps. You lied. And now? You have nothing left. Her face went pale. For the first time, she realized she had no way out. But she wasn't done fighting. If you divorce me, Dan, you'll still have to pay alimony and child support, she snapped. You might as well stay married. It'll be cheaper. I leaned back, grinning. You seem to have forgotten something, I said smoothly. The postnuptial agreement you insisted on made sure I couldn't claim any of your assets, but in doing so, you also ensured you couldn't touch mine. I watched as her mind raced for a counter-argument. And as for child support? I continued. The boys live with me. They've barely seen you in months. When they do, they don't trust you. I've kept records, Sophia. I know exactly how many nights you actually spent at home. I let my next words hit with full force. You were gone more than half the year. How do you plan to convince a judge you're their primary caregiver? Her confidence wavered, but she forced herself to hold her ground. Fine, she said, masking her panic. Just give me $6 million for my shares, and I'll walk away. I chuckled. Coldly. Oh, sweetheart, I murmured. I don't need your shares to run this company. I took a slow sip of wine before continuing. My 70% gives me full control. You only hold 30%. Your stock? Worthless to me. Her lips parted slightly, the realization dawning on her. And let me be clear, I added, my tone calm but final. As long as you own those shares, there won't be a single dividend paid out. If I need extra income, I'll just increase my salary. If the company does well, the employees will see bonuses before you see a dime. Her hands clenched into fists. You can't do that. I smiled coldly. I can. And I will. Caldwell Manufacturing is going to be an industry leader. Every dollar of profit will be reinvested into technology, expansion, and employee wages. I paused, savoring the moment. Shareholders? They can wait. She was shaking now. Then buy me out, she whispered. I leaned forward, my voice dropping. I will. But not for $6 million. She stared at me, dread pooling in her eyes. I'll give you $100,000 for your entire stake, I said slowly. That's the actual market value for a powerless minority shareholder in a company they can't influence. Her breath hitched. That's not fair. No, I agreed, tilting my head. It's business. Her fingers trembled, clinging to her last hope. You really won't give me child support? I shook my head. You haven't been their mother in years, Sophia. They don't even ask about you anymore. I let my words settle in. And if you fight this in court? My voice stayed calm, steady. My investigator has names, dates, timestamps. We can subpoena the men you've been with. They'll testify under oath. I leaned back, taking the last sip of my wine. Your reputation will be destroyed. The whole town will see the real Sophia Caldwell. Her shoulders slumped. Why are you doing this, Dan? She whispered. I loved you. I held her gaze for a long moment. Not enough. I stood, walking toward the door. You only ever loved yourself. I glanced back one last time. Goodbye, Sophia. Then, I walked out. A free man. A happy father. And the sole owner of everything she had ever wanted.